Osrith was here. Finan's mind, distressed as he sat beside Uhtred, as his lord listened to Aldhelm and Ethelfled, felt unsettled. She was here, and she would know her brother would be here, and by extension, him. A message from Ragnall himself that he would very much accept a welcome at Cester. Of course he would. Finan turned and saw Uhtred stand up, and I say, let's give him one. Uhtred paced about the hall, nodding to Aldhelm. Invite him here, and his generals, and once inside, an hour later, and the Norse without the walls would be leaderless. Ethelfled turned her head, slowly. No, she said, I will not do this. And Finan's ears heard the lady continuing to negotiate a plan of action between her two trusted generals. He would fit into it, Finan thought, as he always did. She wanted him to go to her, Osrith, who had left their child in a place that she knew was safe. He had courage on the battlefield, no doubt, but he had no courage to leave Uhtred. Even the promise he had given to her when last he had seen the woman he loved was a hollow one. Bibbenberg. He had promised he would go to her when Uhtred had secured Bibbenberg. But when that would be and how long that would take was indeterminable. But he wanted her badly. And it was true what that bastard Bitlander had said to him, that he was nothing but a whoremonger. Finan had, he admitted to himself, gone to the brothel, gone even to the chamber of a woman who he had liked the look of. But when it got to it, he hadn't been able to go through with it. She had just stared at him, with dark eyes, not even demanding payment for the time he had wasted when she could have been with someone else. Emma, she had said her name was a Frankish name, Finan had replied, looking over her naked form and idly wondering whether Edith, also half Frankish, would have looked like her, undressed. But still, Finan could not coax his cock to stiffness, and even if he had, he didn't want it. Damn Uhtred and his ideas. So he had left, pressing a silver piece into the girl's hand. And then he had careered down the steps and into a very drunken Angus, who had recognized him, and had drawn a sword in him, telling him he was a bastard and that Osrith was well out of it. Of course, Finan had known what it had looked like. And there was no telling a bunch of arrogant warriors from Alba he had just been looking. Then, he had made a mistake. He had admitted his feelings, his weakness. To the least drunk of them all, to the man called Eswi, he asked after Osrith. But before the man could step up and talk to Finan, Engus butted in, telling him that she had put him behind her. She and I are betrothed, Finan said, a man calling on the last remnants of truth. Or truth that he knew it. But Angus had laughed, despite being pulled back by the other two men, and told him. Sainid, the man's name was Sainin Ui Alpin, head of Constantine's household guard. You and she are over, Angus taunted. So I would take your flimsy little sword and piss off back to fairyland. Maybe the great queen of the Sai has someone for you, or she could wed you herself. The Morrigan, Finan thought sadly, the last refuge of those poor people who are thrown over. And, as he let the arrogant bastard Albalords pass, he had looked up to the tavern, considering whether he should go and find Emma, to get his silver's worth. Uhtred's idea, he thought, as his lord continued to argue with Aldhelm over the Norse, Uhtred's idea to get a whore for the night. And he wanted no one but Osrith, who had looked as he had remembered her, standing before Lady Ethelfled, holding her own, even insulting her without the lady knowing it. Finan looked across to Uhtred. His best friend, his lord, knew how much he loved her, and it rankled with Uhtred, because she was his sister. Osrith, no longer his. Some bastard Pict was to marry her now. It was too late. He had missed his chance. He was to blame. He and Constantine. For he had the feeling that the king of Alba had manufactured this. Constantine knew who he was, and why he had been in slavery. Who his father and brother were. Did she know? It didn't matter. None of it mattered now. So Finan focused on the strategy, focused on the detail, thinking about how he could get the most out of the offensive that was to come. Fighting in battle, with monstrous ferocity, with all his heart and soul and strength and might, giving everything he had, imagining that every enemy was free, or the man who had dragged him to the slaver fighting his enslavement in every battle. This one would be no different. Unfortunately for Finan the Agile, this was one time that he would be wrong. 88,888,888. They had been perfect, Osrith thought, as the moon rose in the coal-black sky. Every one of her men, the Mersons, the Picts, the Gael and the Strathclyde Prince, all turned out for training, all had fought and practiced, the Alba men screaming their arrival to the amusement of the Mersons imitating Phelim and Angus and Eswi when it was their turn to initiate the one-on-one combat practice. Nothing untoward had been seen by the Mersons that afternoon, Elfrith told Osrith. The Norse had continued a steady line forward, along the banks of the Merse. Every so often a longboat drifted languorously against the river flow. There will be something, Osrith thought, and she had made them tell her again, one by one, in atomized detail of what they had seen and heard. But it was true. What they had witnessed then, Owain and Oshir pairing to the north and watching the slow inching of the Norse northwestwards, or Falkberg and Eswi to the west watching a cluster of men packed densely and turning slowly like a starling murmuration, was nothing untoward, nothing on which to build a hypothesis. Night, Osrith sensed, would be the place for it, so she organized for the men to relieve one another, in their mixed pairs, every few hours, and gain rest in between. They needed to be ready. What is northwest? Osrith asked Aldhelm, as he found her in the stable, filling up the saddlebags of the Alba horses. And we're not going anywhere, yet. Then, don't, said Aldhelm, stay here, don't go into danger. Osrith turned slowly, searching in the moonlight for the jest on the Merson's face. But there was none. He was serious. Then, why am I here, if it is not to fight? Besides, I have been given autonomy of the men. I gave a plan. You were given autonomy because they refused to serve anyone else, because they held their heads high when other men jibed them about being led by a woman. Oh yes, Aldhelm told her. Merson warriors have long memories. Osrith said nothing, but continued to tie up the saddles. Aldhelm, ignored, slammed his hand across the flap. Don't go, he told Osrith, or at least tell me what you have planned. What do you have planned, that you won't tell me? Osrith asked, or the lady. What is your strategy? Because mine is to go out and face them when the time is right. And when will the time be right? When I deem it to be. And we will be first on the battlefield, and last off it, and the Mersons, Elfkin's Mersons, will be lauded as heroes, heroes who could tame lords of Alba, a prince, no less, to work their way. They will have upheld the alliance, even though, not Constantine, not Ethelfled, has confided a reason that I am here. She shook her head, then pushed his hand away. But Aldhelm took it. No, Osrith, he told her, not letting go when she struggled. It's madness. But before Aldhelm could say any more, Osrith pressed her toes to the stable floor, and pushed herself up, catching Aldhelm's lips with her own. She had done it once before, when she had offered herself once before to the man, when he was on the way to carry out Ethelred's plot to kill the current lady of the Mersons. Idly, Osrith had wondered, had he given in to her and taken her in Ethelfled's Saltwick stable, what it would have been like. Would he have been fast, or slow, taken his time, approached the act with nervousness or arrogance? Would Aldhelm have touched her body with tenderness, or would it have been with the selfishness some men had of taking the pleasure all for themselves, leaving the woman whore guilty and empty? Osrith supposed she would never know, although she remembered how she had, a few nights after propositioning Aldhelm, all those years ago, that she had found a secluded place at the top of Aylesbury's palace keep, her hands bringing her young body to hot, breathless orgasm, quickly and energetically, riding her own fingers as she searched her cunt and clit for pleasure while imagining it was Aldhelm holding on to her breasts, pressing lips and tongue to her nipples, making her come. Why she had wished to hump Aldhelm, Osrith did not know. Perhaps she had sensed his growing feelings towards Ethelfled, and his distaste at following Ethelred's orders. He would have had to deal with knowing about Uted's time with the lady, too. How could he stand it, Osrith wondered. He was loyal to Mercia, that was certain. But to love the woman that much, knowing that she was lying with another man? Aldhelm had become her fantasy every time Ethelflaed irked her, that the man who adored the Lady of the Mersons had succumbed, physically, to Osrith, who hated her. The kiss, there, within Cester, as the Norse idled by, would not be the last time she and Aldhelm would kiss. But it ended then, but not until a good minute had gone by. When he pulled away, Osrith stole another kiss. She was teasing him now. Aldhelm, however, did not look amused, and stood away from Osrith, folding his arms. No, no, Aldhelm told her sternly, when Osrith took a step towards him, now out of impishness than anything else. No more of that. You are betrothed, are you not? Did you get the sleep I told you to? I did, Osrith replied, and to your first question, twice betrothed, she added, admitting more than she had intended. But one man will never come, and the other is promised to me after my service in Mercia. The king of Alba? Aldhelm asked, in astonishment. What? Osrith replied, shocked. No, no, not Constantine. She stepped forward again, but Aldhelm put up a guarding hand between her and himself. Osrith, Aldhelm began. You must not kiss me like that again. It is not proper, it is not right. If I had been any other man. Osrith bowed her head, knowing the end of that sentence was probably, if I had been any other man, kissing me like that would have ended with you on your back, and me up to my hilt in you. You're right, I am sorry, Aldhelm. She glanced to the horse, who had barely moved in his sleep as she had saddled him. It's past, Aldhelm told her. But, we are going, she told him. Will you help me? She told Aldhelm she was looking at the Norse, and explained that what it seemed like they were doing was taking the land Ethelflaed had gifted to Ragnall. What's that settlement? Eadspirig, he told her, and looked over the ramparts. It did indeed seem that the Norse were heading that way. But they are not stopping there. They are not, Osrith thought, but they are moving slowly enough that they could stop. And if something were to distract your attention long enough to focus Mercia's attention west. He is a good man, Osrith told him. Sained, and then felt a shiver of guilt enter her body as she thought of the promise she had made. Once I had given my time to Ethelflaed, my 2 years, we will marry, and I will farm. And Osrith half listened to the head of Ethelflaed's guard as he detailed the battle strategy, Finan's name between them, unsaid. 88,888,888. Below, just before dawn, and the Lady of the Mersons rode out through the western gate, on her white horse she had unimaginatively named, Ghost. Osrith was, unfortunately, also at the same gate with her company, for she had finally seen something. Your eyesight is better than mine, Aldhelm had dismissed, when Osrith pointed out into the darkness just before the sun came up. Osrith doubted that, and it had taken Owain and Elfkin, her youngest warriors, to take an interest in a spot on the southern bank of the Merse, by the fortress of Brunanburg. Cock. Osrith prompted, and they searched for the red she thought she saw, until it became something that was for real, fire. Fire in a tiny speck, in a place where the Danes and Norse had put their longboats. The tiniest of pinpricks, like a new-grown rose thorn embedding itself into flesh. Dan, we murmured. Red sparks, there, Miral confirmed. And her company was agreeing with her, bringing Aldhelm back to life, as he too searched for the red sparks. We go, now, Osrith told her men, and they congregated in the forecourtyard, horses ready by their own able hands, done surreptitiously as they had changed watch shifts. For Osrith knew, deep in her heart, that those red sparks would soon be coursing through the material over at Brunanburg, sacrificial boats, perhaps, placed strategically enough near the fortress that would make Ethelflaed worry about the defense, and draw her attention. If she were Ragnall, or if she were Eirik and Siegfried Thorgilson, she would then, with the slow-moving people allowed to pass through the land they wished to occupy, gifted by a benevolent sovereign, make sure those people were her warriors made to look like normal families, who could then turn at a stroke into a fighting body of men. If she were Norse or Dane, she would then take those men to a poorly defended fortress and take it. Beginning, she would hope, the conquest of Western Mercia. So Osrith was taking her men to the poorly defended fortress. Aldhelm had told her, as they stood watch together, that Cester was being made into a burgh, refortified as it was, with the muscle from Eadisberrig. It was foolish to make it weaker. That could have been a role for Osrith and the Alba Lords. Had Ethelfled had sense, Osrith could have been lodged there, with Elfkin's men too, and held it for her. But it made little difference now. That was where they were going. It was unfortunate that Osrith now chose to take her 10 men, for Elfrith and Miral were determined to come as well, east, and not west, where the rest of the mercenaries were going, and had chosen that moment to go through the western gates at the same time as Ethelfled. "Fire, Lord Aldhelm," Ethelfled told her general. "Yes, just as I thought may happen. It was provident that you spied it." She was good, very good, Osrith thought, for when Osrith snorted, Ethelfled did not even turn her head. "You are riding, Lady Ethelfled, into the direction of a fire?" Osrith asked, their horses still nose-facing to the east. "What will become of Mercia should you not return?" "What makes you think I would not return?" she asked, stiffly. Beside her, Athelstan lingered, watching with grey, hawk-like eyes how this interaction was unfolding. Yes, he was Edward's son, Ethelfled's nephew. Yes, he had been mentored by Uhtred. Something set the young men apart from them, however, that he had his own mind, and that he would use it, when he needed to. It also made Osrith sense that she was in the presence of his grandfather, that she wanted her actions to be seen as honest. How a teenager could make a person feel like that was beyond Osrith, but it made her more determined to head east, more determined to be proved right, that the Norse were indeed planning a raid on the fortress, intent on Kigbit and gaining a foothold in Mercia. If no one would listen, she must show them all. The outcome would speak for itself. So it was Eadisberrig. That was where Ethelfled and Aldhelm should be looking. But they were focused west, where the Merse opened out into sheltered sea, where many longboats were still positioned. "You take your men east, Osrith of Alba," Ethelfled told her, "under your own orders." Then, this time her tone was lighter. There was a laugh in her words, and not a humorous one. That was fighting talk. Ethelfled was, in effect, accusing her of following no master, no king or, as it was, no lady. She must know she had no orders to begin with, and that her choice was to follow on, and mingle in the melee, bringing no glory to her men, or remain behind and shame them all. "I know of no orders bar one, lady," Osrith told Ethelfled, "for I have been given none. I understand my role is to honor the alliance between my king and you, and therefore fight for Mercia. So I am fighting for Mercia." Aldhelm spoke then and called that the flames were getting greater. Had he not, Osrith would have been seen turning her back on the Lady of the Mercenaries. "We come, Lord Aldhelm," Ethelfled called to her general, and she turned aghast from Osrith, who turned east, her men close pressed because of the rest of the mercenaries' army heading in the other direction. "Who commands at Eadisberrig?" "Lord Aldhelm," Osrith called, having moved on her horse 20 feet. "Lord Aldred," Aldhelm called back, and Osrith felt her stomach sink. Could it be that Weaselrat of a guard who had caused her grief in Wessex had gained favour under Ethelfled? Another trial from the Lord in heaven? Had she brought guards with her? He was the one who had delayed her from getting through for the help Allah could give her for Gisela. Osrith always wondered whether, if she had got there sooner, Uhtred's wife could have lived. "A bastard to go to his bitch," Osrith said, in a low voice, but not caring to lower it enough. It should not have gone unchallenged, but at that moment, Aldhelm urged Ethelfled to send her troops to the river. "We will go," Ethelfled told him, glancing scornfully at Osrith, "and you can go wherever you see fit." "Lady," Osrith replied, which could as equally be interpreted as respectful as the insult that Osrith meant to pay. Then she caught Finan's eye. She could not avoid it. They looked at one another, and her heart filled with pain. Part of her wanted to throw herself from her horse, cast away Bue and climb up in front of him. She pulled her horse slower, and Finan put out his hand to take her rein. Osrith's words, then, were wholly in Gaelish. If the Alba Lords understood, it could not be helped. But Osrith knew Uhtred could not speak his friend's language. but just to be sure she spoke quickly. Thamakagad, she told Finan Moore, looking into his steady face. Finan Beak. He was healthy and strong. He could sing and was training with the young princes at Dunnottar, and was in young Edra's care. Finan was about to raise a hand to her face, to ask her of herself, but he suddenly stopped, remembering what the Lord Engus had told him. Indeed, the man was at her side, and he dropped his hand and leaned away. Elfkin continued to lead the men, and Osrith looked on, turning back shortly afterwards to see the back of Finan's black head. That is not the look of someone who is lost to the Calag, we told Elfrith, who nodded, in agreement. But neither had the chance to say anything more, for the rider in front of Finan pulled up sharply and held himself back from Ethelflaed's guard. Turning your back on the battlefield, Osrith of Alba, she heard her the taunt, and all her will, to avoid Utad, and it to rise to any of his words crumbled to nothing. Hooves of horses, of her men, clattered on the ground as they came to a halt, and they watched their captain bring her horse around. No, Osrith. She heard Eswi's cautionary voice, and saw Elfrith catch the reins of her horse and gold her right hand over Bue's hilt. But Osrith stood in her stirrups and turned to Utad. The battle is in this direction. Uwamrid and Seeliog touch Dean Ma tilde superscript 1c, DWA. Pugmarth oin. Dramartha. A gasp of delighted laughter erupted from men as she insulted Utad in three languages. Little pockets from near the south burst forth first, and Osrith noted they could only be from Hywel's men, understanding the southern Cymric. Anarord, or whoever was in charge in the north, laughed in unison with Owain, Phelim and Eswi, while and Aha came from Finan. Engus, too, appreciated the Gaelish. He joined in by shouting in his best Saxon, "No, don't let it be, Captain Osrith. Your ass is too pretty to be kissed by that ungodly bastard." There were murmurings in amongst Ethelflaed's mercenaries now, sensing division, which was unsettling them. What Osrith should have done was turn back, allow calm to restore. But she hadn't finished there. Osrith turned her head to the river and forced her voice even louder. Kriegikvind, Kriegikvind. And if that had not got the attention of the Norse, what she said next would. Thanks to Engus, she had one last thing to add before they thundered eastwards to prevent the feint that the Norse were trying to pull off. For Sir Utad Segoffa Skaldaren, Skaldaren, Osrith repeated, emphasizing the word shoulder. She waited, to make sure her voice had carried to at least the nearest Norse. A tilde. Say Slugmacan. Fire. Aldhelm called again, and Ethelflaed's party suddenly picked up the pace, and all animosity was gone in lieu of the skirmish that was before them. Yes, there was fire, Osrith thought, bitterly, and it was spreading, but could no one see it was a bluff? Then in her sight, hooves and turf and air and Ead Spirig. She was focusing east, and the men under her command were unanimous in their decision to join her. How long would it take until Aldhelm or her brother, or someone realize the Norse were indeed heading in that direction? Osrith could only pray that her company would be in time.